Tēnā koutou katoa, she announced loudly. Haere mai ki tēnei hui, te iwi o rangatānei tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you all for being here today, where our meeting is being recorded and will be on the Council's website. The meeting is also being live streamed in the Council's YouTube channel. As we get underway, you'll see the health and safety requirements for the Council chamber will appear as if by magic on the screen. Councillors have your normal voting devices. For the benefit of those joining us in the gallery, you will note that several colleagues are not here. We'll move to apologies shortly, but many will be joining via the magic of technology, so they'll be able to watch that either live or later. So be assured that elected members might not be present in person, but will be fully aware of our proceedings today. So, as we get underway, we're going to start with the apologies for this meeting. And we've received notification of apologies from the Mayor, who is on official business, if we could just capture that. Councillor Dennison, Councillor Leonie Harpeter, Councillor Karen Naylor, who is optimistically saying late arrival. So we'll see how we go on that. Are there any other apologies, elected members? Then I will move those, seconded by Councillor Barrett, and ask you to vote to receive the apologies. Carried unanimously, I think. 7 seems a very small number, but that is unanimous today. Second item is declarations of interest. I'm not aware of any, and no indication that there are, so we'll move in to public comment, which I'm not expecting because you're all here to make actual comment. So let's move to item 5, which is the hearing of submissions. Now, to get that process underway, the first step is that I must ask committee members to receive the submissions on the Section 17A review of Keisha Birch House and hear from presenters who indicated their wish to be heard in support of their submission, and that the committee note the procedure for hearing of submissions as described in the procedure sheet, which is part of the agenda. So I will move those resolutions in front of us, seconded by Councillor Johnson. Those are procedural, so I don't think we need to seek comments on them. I'll ask you to vote on that. Thank you, that's carried unanimously. And so with that, that opens our meeting to be able to hear submissions based on the written submissions that have been presented already. There are a number of people wishing to be heard today, and I think most are already with us, but feel free to come and go through this meeting as you need to. Our first submitter is Heather Allen, which is submission 85 on page 99 of the agenda paper. And Heather is supported by her husband, Bob, today. So Heather and Bob, I'll invite you to come forward and take a seat. Heather has asked me to let you know, elected members, that she has some sight issues that you might just want to be aware of. What that means is that she can't see you. And if you're asking a question, obviously I'll have said your name, but you might want to say your name again so that she can work out where in the room you are. And don't expect that there'll be a great deal of eye contact because she can't do that. Now, Heather, you have 10 minutes for your submission. This is the same for everybody who's submitting today, and we use a traffic light system, which is not much use to Heather, as I just said, but she knows the timing that she's working with. So your 10 minutes is for you to use how you see fit. You might want to read your submission out, but I will let you know that elected members have already read the submissions that are in front of us. So that's up to you. You might want to summarise it and open for questions. You might have some additional points that you want to make, but take it that your submissions have been read. And if there's time within that 10 minutes, then I'll open up to elected members if they have any questions that they want to put to individual submitters. So on that note, Heather, we will hand over to you as our first submitter this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillors, I take much pleasure in being able to actually talk with you, but I'm rather sad about the subject that we're talking about today. I would like you to be aware of the fact that I have had an extremely long history of governance, both within the city, nationally and regionally. And I have been a city councillor for a 3-year period of term, and also sitting on the Casey Birch Trust Board after that, well after that, for an 8-year period, part of which I was in fact the chair of that board. So I am very familiar with the Casey Birch Trust and am well aware of what the issue is before us today. I'm actually asking my husband to prompt me because I can't see, and as one would look at having notes there, one would know how to be prompted. So you'll have to excuse both of us doing a little tandem match here. I'd like to remind you that in 1984, Council actually purchased Casey Birch off the Crown for 10 cents. I think that's the best deal that this city's ever had, quite frankly. And that was arranged in many ways by Brian Elwood, who was the mayor at that time. And because he was the mayor and had dealt with all these issues and in fact formulated the original trust, I rang him and had a very long conversation with him prior to writing my submission. So I'm not going to read my submission to you, but rather talk to various aspects of that. One of the things Sir Brian said to me was, in formulating the Trust Board and doing the work towards it, the first thing that he wanted to take into account, and for him it still stands today, is community participation and community engagement. Both of those words are particularly important, and I'd like you to remember them as I go through my comments. He chose a number of people from the community because he believed that the Trust Board needed to stand away from council. It needed to be made up of community citizens who had the passion, the skill, and the ability to lead this wreck of a building to become what it is in fact today, as we've all seen it at the 125th anniversary. And indeed, that has in fact happened. Community participation has occurred over the last 30 years, and it was in 1991 that the board actually came into place. And at that particular time, councillors might be interested to know that for many years there was a councillor appointed by council on the Trust Board to be there to bring council's view to the table and the debate around the Casey Birch Trust Board governance area. In my opinion, it is very clear that the last 30 years have shown abundantly a positive result for Casey Birch, for this community. Both the board at the governance level and the management of that board have actually taken this old wreck of a building that I said a few minutes ago and brought it into what is now a unique boutique building that is quite different from anything else that the City Council actually owns. You can't compare it with the Convention Centre, you can't compare it with the Regent Theatre, you can't compare it with any other areas in Palmerston North which you can in fact hire buildings in or a room in, because when you go there as a user of this place, you actually have your needs tailored specifically for you. For example, you may decide that there's only 10 of you that day and you might need a cup of tea. So you can arrange a cup of tea. But if you want a wedding for 100 people, you get your outside caterer to do that. So the catering service that is there as an option is not a necessity for you to in fact pick up. So I think people misunderstand that, and I'd like to make that abundantly clear, that this very unique situation is tailored for our community, for the people that come, whether they are from the Dental Association or whether they're having a funeral, or whether they're having a wedding. During the time that I was involved as a trustee on that board, I had a role, as you do know now, where I had to report back into council. And I would do that at a regular basis. And that's at reporting back on the statement of intent. Every time I came to this table, there were no comments from councillors other than praise for what the Trust Board was in fact doing. Now, I find that absolutely amazing, because now we have a section 17A sitting in front of us that's saying a lot of other things instead. I also have found that during that period of time that I kept on meeting different council staff. They changed constantly. I was never quite sure who I was talking to. And they all had various jobs and they worked in silos. There was not a uniqueness about the whole thing. However, we harmoniously got on with them, but I find that really quite distracting. And if, in fact, this organisation of KCA Birch is coming into council, I really have major concern about the ability of council to actually interrelate and take over a situation such as KCA Birch, because there'll be many different parts of council that are actually involved. And in your 17A plan that you have put before us to look at today, it is actually quite inappropriate with what you're in fact suggesting. I would like to suggest to you that the Section 17A plan was a desktop publication, that there really wasn't any consultation in respect of that. However, having said that, I am well aware that you as councillors met with the Trust Board and that you had an opportunity to in fact talk about the future of KCA Birch. And that was at a governance level. I remind you to what I said a few minutes ago. I, in fact, am involved in governance, and at this particular moment in this city, I have the responsibility for a major organisation. There would be no way I would walk into a consultation process without having the CEO of my organisation beside me. Now, the reason I would do that is because they are the only people that actually know the business. So your 17A report has never really had an opportunity to talk to the manager of this organisation, who's managed this organisation for 30 years. So that input, which is vital to you councillors around this table to make a decision, unfortunately has been absent. You know, when I look at what is in fact happening, I believe there needs to be a win-win situation here. It's not KCA Birch and the council, two separate entities. It's about these two people or two groups of people working together. If in fact that happened, and you could look very seriously, and you have the power and the ability to do that around this table, because the decision is yours. This decision is not one that actually sits with the officers. It's a governance decision about what happens to a trust board in the city. If this were to happen then, you would find it could only enhance KCA Birch. Now, how you go about that is about sitting around the table and working out what is the best method to, in fact, revitalise the KCA Birch Trust Board, to whom you make all the appointments anyway, and also to ensure that you have the right council staff to, in fact, work with that trust board to create a better service to the city, because the city want KCA Birch Trust Board to remain with the trust. You've got before you a number of submissions, and those submissions, 75% of those submissions actually say keep the status quo. Do you really want to go against the community? Because when I go out to the community and say to my friends and colleagues and others in the community, please put a submission in regarding KCA Birch, do you know what they say? I think KCA Birch should stay just as it is. Well, put a submission in. There's no point, because council does not listen. If that's what the community is saying about this council, that is really sad. So it is in your hands to, in fact, ensure that Casey Birch Trust Board remains, that community participation still exists, and that the community as a whole continue to, in fact, have considerable input into what is happening down there. And if you look at the submissions in front of you, you will find that in the majority of heritage buildings within New Zealand, there is an independent trust board. Another issue I think that you should look at quite seriously, does it really need to be a council-controlled organisation? Now, I leave it with you. Maybe it is time for a change, but it's not to tip the baby out with the bathwater. It's in fact to say quite clearly, let's work in true, honest, open partnership to ensure that the skills that are sitting in council can be used to enhance the Casey Birch Trust Board to make a stronger entity of it within this community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather, for coming and speaking, and thank you, Bob, for supporting Heather in that. I'm afraid that took all of the 10 minutes, so we won't have time for questions on that. Thank you so much for your time today. If you'd like to step back into the gallery, you're very welcome to stay as we move on into our next submission. Next submission is submission 59 from John Hornblow, another who is not a stranger to this chamber. So that's on page 68 of the order paper. John, I think you're familiar with our traffic light system, but again, 10 minutes to use as you will. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and greetings, councillors. I wish to just summarise my submission and start by saying that I think what you're going to hear over the next period of time are very similar comments with minor variations, and as my submission says, I speak with a considerable background for Acacia Birch and historic buildings in this city, as somebody who has used it extensively, looked at it from a governance point of view and been a board member for many years. I have no problem with reviews. I think reviews need to be held. My fundamental issue, though, councillors, is that this is a very poor report. I'll say it again, I think it is a very poor report. Section 17A reporting has 3 criteria which are there. This report addresses actually only the second, the cost effectiveness, and therefore I think the report should be scrubbed. I don't think it should be used as a basis. Officers, as it says, should not be responsible for a significant asset in the city or a change to that based on the material in this report. The deficiency with council officers being used to run this place, run Acacia Birch, have been touched on by Heather, but my points there are that they come and go with such frequency that networking and institutional knowledge is actually not even passed on, it is completely lost. They have a professional view of the building, but no passion often. They have many projects to look out for and to budget for and to go over. Often they have limited, like any other person, community connection. I have seen in my business and professional life contractors come in on the basis of council contracts, and council officers, not only in this council but many throughout the country, completely lack the ability to manage contractors. It's a specialised skill that isn't part of their training, as far as I'm usually aware. And they often lack the time and the ability to be innovative and strategic. So I think this report places a great deal of risk on council if you are to adopt the recommendation. Further, I think it actually moves us away from achieving the city goals and vision. You need to go back to those. Those are the primary drivers in this town, those that you have already agreed to. I don't need to go over them because actually you have them. The report, the definition or the terms for the review had 3 criteria. preservation of the property's heritage value, promoting of public access and financial sustainability. And this report, and this is important, disproportionately places the emphasis on financial sustainability. However, there are a number of erroneous things which this report alludes to. One, compliance costs. In my experience on Acacia Birch Board, we agonised, struggled, fought for reducing costs that had been generated. Where were those costs largely from? Local and central government. And there was no relief, or very little. And so that campaign just largely fell on deaf ears, and we were paying huge amounts of money for stuff that didn't actually add a scrap to the city's use of the building. Now, second point, regarding the costs that the report alludes to, rightly the report says there's difficulty in determining with any certainty what comparative costs would be, the council would be able to deliver. Let me tell you that from my investigation, the report, as far as I can work out, has not ascertained any calculations, or it's omitted to gather calculations around the costs of financial services, the cost of event promotion, the cost of governance activity, and the cost of internal services to the City Council. On what basis can you then say you'd save 23,000 paltry dollars? On what basis can you say that it actually is going to be financially far better? So I think the report is to be seriously questioned. Further, the report says that the nature of the service provides limited opportunities to fully utilise the skills of the board at a strategic level. Councillors, listen to me. That's nonsense. It is absolutely patently wrong. It is nonsense. If you look at the strategic plan, and I've done those with businesses right round and councils right around the country, for a voluntary organisation to look at that particular strategic plan, it's a good strategic plan. There's nothing wrong with it whatsoever, and I've worked with it for many years. Then there comes the issue of performance and addressing performance. It's glossed over so superficially in the report. What issues? Issues with whom? Issues about what? It's just silence. The next point is that the option that's there is unlikely to be commercially viable considering the constraints imposed on the property. That's correct. But some of those are because of council's own making. And some of them are because, as Heather rightly said, this is a unique property. You know, I have seen people go in there who are from cultures that are seriously disadvantaged in this city, very low income, and they can make their own culturally appropriate meals or food or provide it, or low-cost weddings. This is not the arena. It is not people who've got disposable money to go to the Regent. This is not people who've got money and can go to the convention centre. Of course it's not going to make money. It never was intended to. My next point is that the quote is, council can access operational efficiencies and economies of scale to increase financial viability. I'm really cross about that. That is blatant, wrong. I argued for years that this council, and I argued to council, should actually take all of its facilities, which are not in competition to each other but complementary, and market them to New Zealand and to the region. Market them together as one entity. It still has not happened. Those with money, like the Regent, how much is their budget? You know, we couldn't get any money out of council to market, or very little, paltry, a couple of thousand a year to market Acacia Birch. Imagine if that was true, how we could exponentially grow the use of that particular facility, Acacia Birch. And as a further example, I argued for years to get a big brown sign on Fitzherbert Avenue telling everybody that Keisha Birch was down there. I can't tell you how many years it took because I gave up in frustration. Efficiencies? Nonsense. We spent hours and hours trying to get something as simple as a big brown sign when we should have been spending time and money on other things. And so Council can quickly adjust is my final point, which is an erroneous statement because actually volunteers, professionally backed, can operate far more quickly and efficiently and effectively than any bureaucratic. We all know that. It's not to say that bureaucracy is wrong, it's needed, but in a case of urgency, the only time they operate faster is when there's a civil defence emergency. So, why? I have heard on the grapevine it's because council officers have spare capacity and they have to find places to use that spare capacity. That is no reason for doing this. They can look somewhere else. Or it's because actually there are performance issues that haven't been addressed. Well, they have been, and they can be. So research has shown, I remember reading years ago, that buildings run by the community for the community, such as a vast number of heritage sites throughout New Zealand, are vastly better run by good volunteers such as our team here who are passionate and professional. They're much more viable and they are much more able to respond to the community. I request that councillors actually don't even vote on the report, but if you have to, scrap it.
Thank you, John. And the red light is flashing, so I'm afraid that leaves us with no time for questions. So we'll move to our third submitter, another who is no stranger to this chamber. Paul Rieger, if you would like to come forward. That is submission 90, which is on page 111 of the order paper for those following along in the papers. Paul, you're very welcome here today. Lovely to see you.
Thank
Over
you.
to you for your
Thank
submission,
you, Madam
please.
Chair. I'm sorry my submission was only one line. And what I'm about to say isn't going to take very long because it's been so clearly expressed by the first two speakers who have intimate knowledge of how this organisation should be running. What I did want to stress, though, were a couple of points, and John Hornblow made some of them, about the passion and the skills of the people who volunteer for trust boards generally of this type of organisation. Not every organisation benefits necessarily from volunteers who put their hand up because they think there's a bit of honour and glory in it, but in reality, they don't have the skills to match what's required. But generally speaking, places like Keisha Birch don't attract volunteer trustees who don't have both skill and passion. I see David Chappell here. I think he knows a thing or two about the odd building. And I just want to add to John's comment that in the last annual P&L statement that I saw, didn't disclose just how you were going to save roughly $23,000. And I suspect that analysis was a desktop job, and there will be other issues that have been dealt with by the Trust Board, by volunteers, at no actual cost to the council or the community. So here is one extremely serious deficiency in the particular analysis that I think you've undertaken. And my somewhat lengthy experience with councils and these sorts of organisations is that when council takes over complete control of organisations like this, that the desktop reviews are notoriously inaccurate. I was about to lay a wager with somebody and he wouldn't take it around this table. And I put down $10 for any charity if in fact not only did you not save $23,000 but it cost you an extra $23,000 and there weren't any takers. That offer's still open. However, what I do want to address in a bit more length, and it supports clearly what both John and Heather said, institutional knowledge is something that councils are not good at keeping, and they don't necessarily have dedicated staff like we used to in the old days. And I'm not saying that was particularly good, but it was valuable, where we had staff on council for 40 years. We had a chap who looked after the drains. He was a character. I don't think there was a pipe or a joint anywhere underground in the city. They didn't know where it was and what condition it was in. Ron Kersel, my word, what a man. However, if you pursue the policy that you're threatening, all of those sorts of things are going to be lost. And I want to stress that the sort of people who are motivated to serve are the ones that have long institutional knowledge, longer than half the employees you might put onto the job have got with the council, let alone with experience in these areas. So let me make it abundantly clear that the restoration of the Regent Theatre would never have happened in the manner in which it did if it hadn't been for the small army of highly dedicated people with extensive knowledge of the theatre, going back decades, and one thinks immediately of Pat Snoxall in particular, who were instrumental in planning and designing the restoration that we now see, and the large group of volunteers who largely man it. Very similar situation developed with the restoration and management of Catcher Birch. And I see an exact parallel there, except that the Regent gets a bit more money than Catcher Birch does. Hence my support, not necessarily for the status quo. I liked option 4 because it got rid of the CCO. And if that was part of the savings you were going to achieve, well, go with that. CCOs have their place in local government. I don't think it would matter if you abandon that and instead, as your option suggests, took over the fundamental running, in other words, the underpinning of the maintenance, the costs of the maintenance of the building, but gave a group a lease for a term. And I don't know whether you'd want a short term, like 1 year, or be a bit braver and give a 3-year term, with conditions, the sorts of things you want sorted out. And if there are unique and unusual situations, which the average trust board might only come across once every 5 or 6 or 7 years, you then offer and pay for the loan of an appropriately qualified officer who knows about that particular legal or procedural skill that the trust board doesn't need to have on staff to all the time and hopefully hardly ever needs. So I just want to remind you of the vast array of skills and dedication of volunteer groups of citizens that you see every year on the occasion of the Civic Awards. It's a parallel, it's a resource you can't afford to lose, and I look forward to hearing your final decision that continues, I hope, to involve the skills of the volunteer sector in some way. Thank you for your consideration. And although there are time for questions...
There is. We are still on the green light, so thank you all. There are lots of time for questions.
I don't expect any.
Don't you? Because I have one.
Oh, okay, shoot.
So you said the benefit of getting rid of the CCO. I wondered if you would say more about what you see as the benefit of not having a CCO there. And then in your brave support of option 4, I think you stand alone in that one, what would you see happening to the trust board in your option 4?
That'd be the group that you would give the lease to.
So potentially one of a series of leases?
Well, the term of the lease and the conditions are something that council would determine. But the point is, it would be very little change to the status quo, except that you'd have got rid of the CCO. And my understanding of CCOs from my time on Horizons was that there are some quite lengthy administrative details that backroom staff have to take care of just to keep the jolly thing going. And the attendances that senior staff need to make at meetings of the CCO and all the trimmings that go with it, which you could largely avoid with I still think you'd need once again a councillor appointed to the trust board to report back and avoid all that. And I don't know what a CCO costs to administer. I frankly never dared to ask, but it would have been, when I think you said 33,000 for the option 4, I suspected that a fair bit of that would have been to administer the cost of the CCO.
Thank you. There's a question from Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Paul. Appreciate the chance to have a conversation with you here. Just interested really in your reflections, I guess, given your experience around cases where a council might absorb an organization, and I'm speaking a little bit generically here, but those sort of cases where an advisory group or a friends of group is brought into the picture to try to help bring the community's voice very directly into those. What's your experience with those in terms of how well they work and serve or don't serve the purposes of the community?
Well, thanks, Brent. Normally they work quite well. They have different names, that's all.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of questions, so thank you very much, Paul. Our next submitter is Susan Mcconaughey. Submission 63, page 74. Another familiar face. You don't have to worry too much about the explanations or the housekeeping. So, Susan, 10 minutes, over to you.
Thank you. Well, quite a few acts to follow, I must admit.
Indeed.
I thought I would actually start with just a little bit of reminiscence. As a student in the 70s, I actually used to go to tutorials in Ketchebirch, and I have to say it was very run down. When you went inside, it was dark and dingy because they had put so many partitions in the building. It was not a great sort of memory I have of the building, but I have to pay homage and thanks to all those who have gone before, who have actually worked tirelessly to bring that building back to its absolutely stately appearance that it is, and looking after the 100-year-old avenue of oaks. I mean, what they have done has left the city with the most amazing heritage site. And so that was a little bit of my memories of the place. I guess I'm going to say the same thing, and I better put my hand up. I'm also a trustee on another CCO, and it's been mentioned quite a few times. I'm on the Regent. And I've been a member of that board for over 30 years. I was also involved with Pat Snoxall being on the Working Party during the time of the Restoration. And I guess as a volunteer, I find it really bizarre that I'm actually having to come back before you and actually convince you of our worth. I mean, you even say it in if you go onto the CCO website, you actually say, in essence, why the council believes in community involvement is to provide business and community expertise that the council cannot access, and that their ability to attract funding from sources other than rates. And I think it's been very, very clearly mentioned that 5 heads around a table are quite frankly a lot better than 1. They also bring skills, knowledge, they bring their networks, they bring their contacts, so you can actually probably triple that and you get it for free. And I find that quite bizarre, to put it very mildly. The other thing I would like to reiterate is someone also mentioned how the fact that community involvement in heritage sites is really vital. And that comes from research done by UNESCO. And they say quite categorically around the world that it is vital to keep community input in your heritage sites. The other thing that's been mentioned, and I also had, don't worry, it's font 20 and double spacing, is the retention. I have seen so many staff come and go,
and there seems to be absolutely no handover of information. So what has been learnt is lost. So here we go, we reinvent it again. And that has happened time and time again in my association with the Regent, and I dare say the same thing has happened with Catcher Birch. The knowledge that people bring to the table, the knowledge that is kept by Catcher Birch is future-proofing for history and for the future, and I think it's a vital thing. And to expect a couple of officers who are already committed to a lot of already council work to have the ability and the time and the hours that it takes to be involved with the board and to think things through, your strategic plans, is something I would find very difficult to actually spread around in your departments. And it was mentioned now it's all been broken up, so it'd be a whole lot of departments. Very little cohesion, very little continuity, and that would worry me greatly. I do worry also that it would become less diverse and much more narrow in view, because I don't see how officers in their offices are actually going to, well, I haven't seen as much community involvement with office staff at the moment. I don't believe we've got telepathy yet, so I'm sort of a bit worried how we're actually going to get the community input into the running of an important building like Catcher Birch. There's a specialist team who have worked tirelessly, and I do pay great credit to them. The issue of being a CCO, I guess, is something that should really be discussed around the table. Paul Rieger mentioned about how he would like to go for number 4 option. I was sort of hoping they would be actually definitely 3 and 4 would be, but no, maybe it's something to be looked at. We are a CCO. Our building is leased, and there is ways around going to solve a problem. I will quote my husband's favourite quote, "To every complex problem there is a simple answer, it is wrong." Now, I think that's a little bit simplistic. I think to a complex problem, there really needs to be complex solutions. And I really do think, as been mentioned by Heather and several others, what has to be really approached now is a concerted effort by both council and the board to come together to see what can be a good solution for everybody and to achieve the outcomes that everyone is desiring. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I will open that up for questions. But I was very glad to see your submission, because when the officer's report talked about a Friends of organisation, obviously my thoughts went immediately to Friends of the Regent. So I wanted to take this opportunity to ask you to comment on how that works to support that active volunteerism that we're looking to see in whatever outcome we go with.
That actually grew out of a previous councillor, Wana Davis, who had heard of the Friends of the Regent down in Dunedin, and she sent a person down to investigate, and they came back, and so it was set up as an independent, incorporated society with their own constitution and with their own goals. It was also done in conjunction with the Regent. In the beginning, they actually helped with the fundraising campaign. They actually helped sell the seats. And then after the opening of the Regent, the decision was that they would be not exactly contracted, but what their role would be to provide the ushering and catering services. We tried to have an outside, found it didn't work, it wasn't actually viably profitable for them, so the Friends of the Regent decided to take that on. Other than that, what happens is that, of course, everyone who comes gets billed, and they have decided not to take the money. They hold it in trust and build on the reserves, and we apply for extra funding if we need it. Oh, and I did forget to say that vital thing about funding. if you don't have a trust board or an incorporated or one with a trust deed, that's all the financial costs will come straight back onto you, the council, and the ratepayer. A board can go out and get a whole range of sources that can bring in. So I don't know, did that answer the question?
Thank you. Food for thought. There's a question from Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Susan, for the submission. Almost everyone who has argued for the status quo, they don't see any problem with the trust board, but you are suggesting that there should be complex solutions to the complex problem. What do you think is the complex problem here?
Well, I think it has been raised in by several before me, the fact that the 17A review, and I know from our point of view, we were very unhappy with the review. It really was looking at a financial aspect, not the wider, the community. And so I would say before any real decision, and what seems to have been the problem, that whole area really never got resolved before coming to this stage.
You mean the funding?
No, actually the issues that were raised by the 17A review.
Thank you.
I could be wrong.
No, I think that's
Thank
Councillor
you.
Butt
Thank
looks
you,
like
Madam
he's
Chair.
had that question.
Thank
I just
you.
had one final question, which was your comment about the UNESCO research, and I'll recognise that the submission from Tanya Koptiko was also in the gallery, raised the same reference, and you made a comment, the findings of UNESCO are unequivocal that community boards are vital to heritage status buildings. Did they say, and I've not read the research, so it's a genuine question, did they say community boards are vital, or was it community involvement,
Community
support?
involvement.
Right, okay, thank you, I just wanted to clarify that. And that has us to the red light, so thank you very much, Susan. Oh, and Annette has arrived, very good timing. Annette, we'd love to invite you to come and join us at the table. Annette Nixon with submission 82, which is on page 95 of the papers. Now, Annette, you weren't here for the housekeeping or the traffic light explanation, but you're very familiar with this place, so I think you'll be good to go. Over to you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your welcome. Council officers, councillors, members of the public, interested parties, thank you for making provision for oral submissions on this occasion. I think it's a very valuable exercise. Can I say that managing a public facility or any property is not easy? There are multiple stakeholders, in this case, the public, the interest groups, customers, clients, hiring space, the workers, the volunteers, and of course, the funders, all with a range of expectations and perceptions about what's happening. So my background includes managing commercial and residential property, being a current trust board member of 2 organisations. Between them, we manage 4 properties, and many years of working with the Awapuni Community Centre, which has been an interesting exercise in managing property as well. And of course, I've sat here and been part of decision making. So this review of Cashier Birch and how management should be carried out, while it's upset many people, I think it has made 2 major achievements. First of all, it's allowed people in this 100 plus submissions to acknowledge the appreciation they have for the Trust Board, the Trust Board's dedication, the range of competencies and contributions that they have made since it was established. And I think there aren't many opportunities for Trust Boards to actually receive acknowledgement for work well done. And as part of that, it has also, there are submissions which acknowledge the skills and knowledge of the manager and the service provided to the city by this competency and the way the manager and her staff have run Cashier Birch operations that ensures there are returning clients and that people want to be there and want to be using the facility. So that's no small gain. And secondly, there's an excellent range of feedback that's unearthing those elements of discontent that can simmer alongside any management structure, as you well know. And sometimes it's very hard to find out what people are discontented about. But I think this process has helped. It's easy to do appreciation, but it takes courage to address what people are unhappy about. And I think you can be very proud of the submissions you've received because they are so wide-ranging, so thoughtful, and I think people who have submitted have done a really good job in helping you for the next part of the task that you have to undertake. One of the suggestions was about promotion and marketing. Now, I'm not going to give it any value judgment, but some of the points that came to mind were about selling the service. How do you promote Cashier Birch in a way which makes people aware of what's on offer there? Using social media, and that is no mean skill. Advice about how or what works best. About having a professional profile in the community and in the region. And this is an area where input from the City Council could certainly help for a planned stage approach to develop good promotion and marketing in that area. So if the council wants a role, there are opportunities for a role to be there. Second comment that came up, discontent among staff members, negative comments about the manager. Now, it mightn't be part of your experience, but it's been part of mine, that any employment matters that are not taken seriously have possibilities for escalating discontent that benefits no one. So there needs to be an employment subcommittee and clear processes that allow people to be able to bring their discontent and their concerns forward and to have them dealt with. There is always the expectation of a Gold Star service, when it might be even less than Bronze Star funding. And anyone who's managed a public facility is well aware of those expectations which feel as if your job is not appreciated and that you're being undermined at every turn. So, what is realistic and achievable with the funding that's provided? You can't overwork your staff. You cannot expect one employee to be available 24/7. Goal setting is an important task, and the goals need to be manageable and achievable. Another issue. It's noted that the manager is also providing a catering service. Is this a conflict of interest? It doesn't seem to me to be a usual kind of action, and perhaps that is something that needs to be looked at. As well as the Cashier Birch building, the coach house, the grounds, together it's a complex management and operational task. So you need to keep that in mind and think about whether or not your expectations and your response to negative criticism is appropriate in the circumstances. The City Council usually sees public facilities as service provision, not profit-making, and I've never known them to break even. So the 23,000 is neither here nor there, really. It's about a service to the community which also enhances the community and its reputation. As our only historic homestead of this nature, it's something to be treasured. So with this good feedback, I think it assures Council that this is a loved, valued facility, and it deserves your love, your care, and your support to ensure that the facility itself and the people involved with it can continue to thrive. And I'll just check and see if there was anything else that I have missed out. But no, I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you for that very thoughtful, considered submission. In your written submission, you referenced Thompson House in Levin, and I wondered if that was something you had particular knowledge of that you were able to share with us.
I know that they have a residential caretaker who is there to be able to open up and to be able to close the facility each day. And, of course, do a whole lot of other bits and pieces as well.
Thank you. That is useful because that was a comment that came through on somebody else's submission as well about that being a potential.
I think I'd said that there are many ways to manage a facility. I mean, the models are there if you want to look at them. But I don't think getting rid of the trust board and the staff is the way to go.
Thank you. There are no questions, and we've come to the end of time as well, so very well timed. Immaculate as usual. Thank you very much. Lovely to see you. Which brings us to our last submission to be heard today, which is from the Couch Birch Trust Board themselves. Submission 81 at page 93. Grant O'Donnell, the chair, is speaking to us, and Nikki also? No, just Grant. Thank you. Grant, can I ask you to speak into the microphone for the purposes of people watching at home?
I have copies of what I'm about to speak to.
Third time's the
Would you
charm.
like us to distribute them?
If you can pass them to the administrator, they'll make sure they're given out. But
No, I'm sorry, we don't.
we don't.
Right, okay. All
Over
right.
to you, Grant. We will press the button and your 10 minutes starts now.
Kia ora. Thank you for the opportunity. The board does not support the proposal, Council's proposal. The board's reasons are mirrored in all the issues of concern, both as to process and to the proposal set out in the submissions against Council's proposal. The overwhelming public response is against Council taking the operation in-house. 78% of submitters and 4% non-committal. They reflect a general expectation of loss of benefit to the community if the proposal is adopted. If councils intend to give any weight to the views of the council, they should reject the proposal out of hand. If they intend to give weight to the views of the public, they should reject the proposal out of hand. To be clear, neither the board nor the manager actively encouraged opposition to council's proposal. Public were encouraged to read, form an opinion and submit. In affirming its opposition to the proposal, the board has considered the arguments raised by those few submitters in favour of the council's proposal. To assist councillors, we have adopted the headings in the council officer's report. There are 4 submitters who have issues with current management. These submissions pale into insignificance when set against the record of almost 30 years of successful management. a record affirmed by those submitters who speak favourably of management then and now of the facility. Councillors should consider carefully what weight can be given to complaints about management. There is no evidence of any current staff in favour of Council's proposal. Issues of management were not raised in the cost effectiveness review document, nor should they have been there or here. Councillors, there are 4 submitters who believe that change will help the venue reach its potential. We agree. The board spent many hours over several months crafting, in conjunction with council officers, a draft 10-year plan which sets out a positive vision for the facility. The change required is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, a phrase which has already been used, but to blend the resources of council and the board to articulate and achieve common goals. Change to the property and the grounds, as one submitter broadly promoted, could lead to derogation from the heritage qualities of the whole property. Remember that the grounds have their own separate heritage status. The existence of the board is intended to give comfort to the community that such changes cannot occur. One submitter considered that the council has appropriate systems and thought that council would do a better job. Many submitters suggested that for a variety of reasons, CBH would suffer from council in-house management. Whether these views are true or not may be moot, but a number of them are based on experience and knowledge. Not included in the list of grounds for opposing the proposal are the comments about ever-changing council staffing and the cumbersome division of responsibility between various departments. Heritage New Zealand thinks council has sufficient capability, but its view of the proposal is predicated on that being true. And we and others say that that is moot. Interestingly, Housing New Zealand is governed by an appointed board of suitably qualified persons, and you could liken their view to one of suggesting their operation could be handed over to Housing New Zealand. Once again, we say that shouldn't be a matter of either the council or the board, but one of the council and the board, each with their complementary roles. One submitter considered the proposal as in the interest of the ratepayers in the community. How that conclusion is reached is not stated. It seems to fly in the face of the views of the vast majority of submitters and of the facts. Two submitters considered there is currently poor marketing. Our response is to say, yes, we agree that marketing can be improved. One easy method is to increase the allocation currently set at under 2% of gross income. The normal recommended range is somewhere around about 5 to 7%. A better approach is set out in the board's draft 10-year plan, which is to fix CBH in the hearts and minds of the community as the city's #1 heritage facility, and let the benefits, including financial returns, flow from there. In either case, marketing could be improved with the cooperation of council staff. Of course, marketing must be goal-driven with clarity of purpose, and as the board has explained on several occasions, council has yet to clarify its goals for CBH. One submitter believes the House needs a fresh, new approach. Based on the submissions, a significant majority disagree and are happy with the status quo. We ask, what fresh new approach do you adopt for a heritage property? What vision do councillors have for this? Could it be communicated to the board? If so, why has this not been done? If there is a vision, can it be incorporated in the board's 10-year plan? Two submitters said the heritage value of the property can be managed by council. A significant number of submitters disagreed, expressing concern, among other things, at the likely loss of focus on the special character of the facility, the loss of institutional knowledge, the lack of knowledge of the special characteristics of the facility, lack of accountability for staff. This submission relates to governance matters and is not relevant to a cost-effectiveness analysis. However, since it's been raised, the board flatly rejects the criticism. The inclusion of this submission in the report is, in my view, inappropriate. Note that one of the submissions referred to makes no mention of staff accountability processes. I make reference to one submission, submission 49. This is an anonymous submission that rejects council's proposal but suggests the board could do better. However, it appears to suffer from misconceptions which result in misguided criticism of the board's results, particularly in relation to its financial performance. Such misconceptions arise from the lack of appreciation of district scheme restrictions, the view that the board and management can act as producers of entertainment events and take on financial risk. CBH is a venue where the community can produce events. The Regent suffers from the same misconception. The failure to understand that an entity utilising public funds must act prudently and require strict accountability from users to avoid criticism from the public, the council and the Auditor General. The same strictures apply to council. As an aside, the Coach House display may not be the state of art, but it is better than nothing, and it's the best that could be achieved with the charitable grants offered. It has generated numerous congratulatory comments, including from local iwi. To summarise, the review, it must be clear to all by now that the desktop review underpinning council's proposal is anything but a genuine cost-effectiveness analysis. There was a determination not to engage with CB to ensure that council staff, councillors and the public were provided with full and accurate information on which to base an opinion. We can say that because we made this point early in the process, even as far back as the first Section 17A review, and no steps were taken by council staff to remedy the deficiency. As with the board, the review failed to convince the vast majority of submitters. The projected savings appear to be illusory. We have correspondence with council that denies any cost should be attributed to any work carried out within existing council resources. This is simply wrong. Even if there is spare capacity as claimed, any work carried out on CBH matters must have a cost contributed to it. Ask any accountant. This would include audit, finance work, booking through the central office. Anecdotally, the spare capacity itself may be illusory. What are the other reasons that might be for the change? To remove the board and trustee, council appoints the board on a regular basis, has power to remove board members if it wishes. It chose not to put councillors on CCO boards. It's never indicated dissatisfaction with the board, at least not to the board. I must say that the council there's some criticism of the way the board has handled the public consultation. The board did not take kindly to the idea of being told what to do to assist in its own dissolution. Change management, if this was the purpose of the process, then that's entirely unethical. Council's the employer to all practical intents and purposes, and is therefore obligated to act in good faith and as a good employer. Assuming that it's not an underlying purpose, nevertheless, council should investigate and consider the financial and other consequences arising from any terminations of employment agreements. The impact of this process on staff and staffing has been significant. To bring forward further new initiatives, nothing wrong with that goal. It begs the question, however, why such initiatives couldn't be considered and achieved by way of collaboration, cooperation and communication with the board. As noted, the board has developed a creative 10-year plan which is now with council for consideration. Just a little bit.
I'll encourage you to wrap up, Grant.
The logical step is for further consultation between council and the board to ensure alignment of their visions. It's unfortunate that some have seen the plan as no more than a lever to extract more funding. That suggests a failure to fully read and consider the entire plan. This brings me to the nub of the matter. Council has not yet achieved a consensus as to what it wants from CBH. Without that, council staff have no guidance comparable to that contained in the deed of trust, which governs the trust board and protects the community. In a report of the Auditor General to Parliament in 2015 concerning the governance and accountability of CCOs, it was stated, a local authority must be able to state the CCO's purpose clearly to enable effective consultation with the community and to set clear objectives for the CCO. Either way, councillors must set clear objectives for CBH. When this has been done, a dialogue can take place between council and the board whereby the goals of both and those of the community can be agreed. In the meantime, we urge councillors to have regard to the far-reaching consequences of disestablishing this long-standing institution. CBH was gifted to council for the benefit of the community. Community members restored it, occupied it, and applied themselves to operating it for the benefit of the community. Council has once again canvassed the community as to its wishes for CBH. The community has spoken clearly and decisively. Councillors should heed and give effect to the community's voice. As tangata whenua have so eloquently said, what is the most important thing in the world? Hei tangata, hei tangata, hei tangata. It is the people, it is the people, it is the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. There is unfortunately no time for questions, but thank you for taking the time to present today. That concludes the submissions that we are hearing in person today, and we'll move to item 6 on our agenda, which is the officers' report, and I invite Julie MacDonald to come down in case there are any questions from elected members, reflecting that you might have questions that you didn't get a chance to ask submitters that Julie might be able to shed some light on through her report, which is a summary of the submissions presented. So, Julie, would you like to make any comments?
No, I think it can be taken as read. Thank you. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions, elected members? I just had a couple, Julie, which I think do flow on from some of the submissions. There's been references to councillor appointments on trust boards. Are you able to say why we don't do that?
No, I'm afraid I'm not. That is possibly a question we can come back to you with some advice on.
Great, thank you. And there was quite a couple of our submitters made reference to spare capacity of council officers, which in the written submissions was attributed to a comment made by the Mayor. Do you have any comment on whether there's spare capacity of council officers?
So I think there are a couple of things being perhaps conflated there, and this is something I tried to clarify in communication back and forth with the Trust Board during the consultation time. I think there are some comments made in the analysis about the advantages of economies of scale. For example, council's books are audited. The cost of additionally auditing Acacia Birch House, if it was to become part of council, would not be the same cost as auditing a separate CCO. That is different from spare capacity, which I don't, that's certainly not my understanding.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Julie. My question is, in your table or report, you have mentioned that 30 of the regular visitors of Acacia Birch have submitted something, and to my knowledge, there is a large number of, or from the reports or from the other submissions, there is a large number of regular users of the Acacia Birch House. Do you think what percentage of these people have submitted something? Do we have an idea or total number out of how many 30 have submitted?
As I've tried to explain in the report, because we weren't able to have any direct information about how that information was distributed through Acacia Birch, I'm unable to answer any questions and not really able to draw any conclusions about how widely their material was distributed.
All right, thank you.
It may be something that Acacia Birch is able to answer now, though. I'm not sure.
Okay, there are no further questions, Julie, so you can step back. I will move that the memorandum titled Section 17A Review of Acacia Birch House Summary of Submissions presented to the Arts, Culture and Heritage Committee on the 13th of April 2021 be received, and look for a seconder for that. Councillor Barrett, thank you. I'll open that for any comments at this stage. Elected members. I did just want to wrap this up with a comment. The nature of all council consultation tends to be adversarial. Council puts up a proposal, that's what we're required to do, and the community responds, and that's always a binary yes or no, and that's difficult. So I want to take this moment to acknowledge the people who took time to make submissions and to add to our thinking in this. The value of the process for elected members is understanding the thinking behind that binary yes or no, not necessarily in a numbers game of who voted for what. The submissions have provided me, and I'm sure all of us, with food for thought, and I hope that that will be reflected in the officers' report back to the extraordinary meeting we'll have on the 5th of May to consider this further. For me, there were a couple of things that came out of it, specifically concerns raised from Heritage New Zealand and Historic Places, Manawatu, Horowhenua, around a conservation plan, and by extension, what that means for our other heritage buildings. A general uncertainty about the idea of a friends of, the rather marvellous example of the Regent, put to one side. How would that work? Would it have the teeth that the Trust Board has? Do we need to look at a model like the Regent operates of a Trust Board, a Friends of, and Regent Promotions, which serves to actually act as the event manager, which is a point that maybe we'd have got into in questions if there'd been time for that. The UNESCO research on the value of community boards that a number of submitters usefully brought up. A general concern, which I think elected members probably share, is about Keisha Birch disappearing inside the machinery of council. And that bringing with it risks to the heritage and special nature of the house and grounds. But also the opportunities of being taken into council of the economies of scale the officer just talked about, and expertise in running events and venues, catering, managing parks, gardens, those kind of things. I think what this has highlighted to me is there is significant potential in Keisha Birch House. The Trust Board recognise it, the many submitters have recognised it. What that potential is, as a commercial offering or as a community facility, I think is for the next stage of this process. For me, I particularly noted the comments about wanting to see better public access to the building and to the grounds. So here we are, moving to the next stage of our Section 17A review. We're focusing on enabling best outcomes for our community, being open to future opportunities, but at the same time being respectful of organisational history and the many people who've been involved to bring it to where it is today. And as we work through this, there will of course be learning about the best way to undertake these Section 17A reviews, and regular council watchers will know that Section 17A has itself been a slightly fraught process over the last few years. So something I'd certainly like to see considered is how we make this process less adversarial, how we take our community with us and how we support our boards through it as we go on from here. Councillor Barrett, you'd like to make a comment?
Only briefly, and firstly to say thank you. I think that sums up where we're at very, very well. What I would really find helpful for myself in receiving information in May would be some very clear insight and options around how community involvement and voice and influence can be maintained if there is to be any change made to the status quo. I think an overwhelming message that I've gotten through these submissions is around that particular issue. And I think we as a council need to have very good clarity on that, especially if we're going to be contemplating change. Madam Chair.
There are no further comments, so I will ask you to vote that we receive the memorandum. Thank you. Carried unanimously. Thank you. Nō reira ngā mihi nui kia koutou, e ngā mana, e ngā reo, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you all for your participation today, and look forward to seeing you again on the 5th of May when we debate this further.